Welcome to the Red Pilled Biker channel. The channel I started probably 2.5, 3 years ago. And I just got a couple of videos up, 3 videos I think, got a couple of subscribers. I think somebody might actually watched one of them. And I just stopped. And here's the reason. I am now, in May of this year, 2021, I will be 5 years out of a 25-year-long unhappy situation, which I call marriage. And when I first started this channel, it was going to be a MGTOW. I was going to talk about it and all that stuff. And I realized it took 2.5 years just to get the stinking divorce. And that was a miserable time. Not all of it. Good things happen, but there was always questions about what my financial life would look like afterwards, and that was probably my number one concern. Of course, you're always, changing, leaving a situation you've been in for 25 years. I knew that when it happened, which will evolve as I go through my little storytelling as I drive along here, because I'm driving along through Central California. And, so there was a lot to lose. And I was accurate in what I would lose. And it has proven to be true. And I've adapted. But at that time, I was in no condition to be making videos, because they weren't going to benefit me. And if they weren't going to benefit me, they sure as hell couldn't benefit anybody else. But I'm in a different place now. And so I'm going to start by just sharing my story occasionally through these videos that I make on this channel. If in fact anybody ever sees them, hell, I don't know. I don't know how to promote it, and don't plan on putting that much effort into trying to promote it, because this is, that's not what I'm about. I'm not that interested in. But I think I do have something to put out there to get back on track, and sharing it will help kind of solidify it in my mind, because you get to a certain age and you would think, okay, by this age maybe you kind of got it figured out, and you don't. In that age, I'm a boomer, and I'm at the younger edge of being a boomer, but nevertheless I'm definitely not a young man. And some of what I've learned, maybe younger people have learned it for far earlier than life than I did. But for some reason, I didn't learn it until later. Or maybe I didn't want to accept it until later. I don't know. But anyway, here's my story. First of all, I was raised in ignorance and fantasy. This is not saying my parents were stupid. I'm talking about an ignorant society that wasn't aware of the changes that were happening about it, around about it, and we weren't taught to pick up on cues about a variety of things. But the main one here is going to be relationships with females. We weren't taught that. A few people were. I think maybe the men of my age who had a greater understanding were people who came from out of divorce, broken homes, call them what you want. But divorce in my childhood was exceptionally rare, at least where I was at and how I was being raised. I can remember very early on, I guess I was playing Little League with a kid, and I must have been, I had to be 10 years old. And I went to his home, which was in an apartment, and there was nobody there but his mom. There was no dad. And I found out later, of course, that they were divorced. Probably far more common than I realized, but that's the first person I can remember and recall in my mind at the age of 10 being divorced. And still, all through high school, every friend I had, every girl I dated, all of them came from 2-parent homes. So we weren't experienced to that. So maybe younger men who are men my age, who at that time had gone through divorce, maybe they had a greater insight into these things. But the rest of us were really raised on an incredible level of ignorance and fantasy. And I want to put the fantasy part in there because we were taught, not even directly, it's not like somebody sat down with a textbook and lectured us, but all we had to do was pick up on the subtle cues, because they sure as hell weren't going to talk about it, on the subtle cues of what relationships are like. And I know I've already tested a video and you're going to hear car sounds, and that's the best I can do because that's what I'm going to be doing this particular video. We had no clue of what relationships were really about. The give and take. It was all hidden from us. I don't blame my parents or their generation no more than they can blame their parents. And for God's sakes, for those younger people out there to somehow hold us boomers to account for all this shit, give it a break. This mountain of garbage was piling up long before we ever entered the scene. And we're suffering through it, and we're the ones, our generation is the one that brought about, the 50% divorce rate that we see. We're the ones who suffered through this shit. And quite frankly, I've suffered through it twice, and have no intention of suffering through it a third time. And the only way to guarantee I will never get divorced again is by never getting married again. And I won't. And I've got a couple more decades in front of me to be alive, and I'm going to walk this one out on my own, guys. Not that I don't have relationships, and not that I don't want to have relationships, because I want to have both. But I'm not going to be foolish enough to allow the state to intervene in my life anymore. Anyway, enough of that. Raised in ignorance, raised in fantasy. The fantasy part was, going back to my earlier topic, was that we were just basically taught subtly, through subtle cues, probably through religious programming, all that stuff, that there's somebody out there who's intended for you. I think the term that would best describe it is there's a soulmate, your other half that will one day complete you and make you whole. Well, as anybody knows, we all feel a little bit empty. And so we're assuming the emptiness goes away when we find the right chick to marry and we hook up with her. It doesn't. We all know that. Even people who are relatively happily married, that 10% out there, according to the statistics I recently heard, that consider themselves actually happily married, would tell you that no, this other person is not going to complete you. The myth of the soulmate, good Lord, guys, I'm talking to my brother, my older brother, who told me he's found his soulmate. Really? This is an educated man. Okay, and I'm sure there are a lot of people out there who believe they've found their soulmate, and I just want to say there ain't no such a thing. We're not. Anyway, that's the fantasy part of it. Will be completed if I do the right things, if I do A, B, C, and D, which is basically if you go get a good skill, get an education, find a decent job, find the right woman, life is just going to be super and great, and everybody's going to be happy, because this is what was projected onto us. As an older man, I look back at my parents and I realize I don't recall them ever fighting. Seriously. Did they fight? They must have. Were my parents happy? I assumed they were as a kid. As I get older and look back on it, some of the subtle things my dad told me is, when I was an adult, things I realized this was not a particularly happy man. And this is the upbringing that so many of us came out of, because it started to become evident even back in that generation. I'm sure it's generational, that these things don't make us happy people. Things have changed in a lot of ways. For one, you could successfully, back in the day, probably my great-grandfather's age, if you instilled in yourself external values, external ideas of good and bad, right and wrong, how to progress in life. You know, if you did those things, the odds of you having a more successful life were probably upped. These are not necessarily true to this day. You can play by the rules. I was a guy who played by the rules. I did the right things. I got the education. I got the good job. And still, it did not work out for me. And I think I speak for millions of men across the world who would agree with that. You play by the rules, it doesn't mean it's always going to work out. As a matter of fact, it's just life is hard. And it doesn't work out. But the ignorance part is what really causes that, because none of us have been taught. Maybe the younger people now, but man, I don't even know about that. There was nobody to talk to. You know, if you went and talked to your grandfather, he's going to tell you, get a job, find a good wife, pop out a couple of pups and get on with it, and everything's going to be okay. If you talk to a dad of my generation, his generation, which is World War II, they're going to tell you the same bullshit. If you went and talked to a wise man, quote unquote, some preacher somewhere, or somebody in that, they're going to tell you that was just commonplace, because they didn't really want to deal with the issues any more than probably we do. We just have to. We're forced into it. Anyway, so this is the ignorance I was raised in. Never told about the red flags. I assumed women were just on the same track with the rest of us. I assumed that they wanted the same things. And if I could find a way to provide those things, everything was going to work out. As I got older, because I wasn't really interested in long-term commitment until I was into my late 20s. Part of that probably due to some kind of immaturity on my part. Could have been some wisdom on my part. I just never had any great desire to get married. But, you know, that's what you do. As I was saying earlier, they before us knew that if they incorporated external values, external mores into their life system, they could probably pull off a relatively successful life. By the time I hit my 20s, I realized that isn't the way things were unfolding for the rest of us. Driving, so I'm having to look around. The external mores were no longer able for us to incorporate. Things were changing. When I was a kid growing up, we had the civil rights movement. Feminism was rearing its ugly head. One of them was very good. Maybe early feminism was good. I don't know. But by the time I hit my mid-20s, I knew that I was not going to look for some woman to impregnate and have her stay at home while I took care of all the business outside. Because A, they'd already changed. They weren't going to do that anyway. So I figured I'm going to find me an educated woman who has a job and she can pull her own weight. And in the long run, if anything does happen, I thought this through my entire marriage, that at least we could divide everything 50-50 and, you know, no harm, no foul. Absolutely not the fucking truth. When I got married, I'm going to skip over the first one because it was short term. Married a psychopath, and I'm kidding, diagnosable nutcase. Very brief, 90-day wedding. How about 90-day marriage? And with a kook, and I was being completely driven by my lower half of my body, so we'll leave it at that. But the second one, I married a professional, a woman with a degree in the law, who was going to be an attorney, and became an attorney. And I'm going to do an entire video on why you should not marry a professional woman. Believe me, their career is going to come before yours. That was mistake number one. That should have been a red flag. Mistake number two was she was divorced herself with 3 kids. Obvious. To you younger men now, it's obvious that was a mistake. Wasn't to me. I was raised to be the superhero. I'm going to step in and fix other people's problems. I don't know that everybody in my generation felt that way, but somehow I had adapted that. I was going to be the next Jesus Christ, and I was going to step into these people's lives, and I was going to raise these children, and oh, by golly, wasn't I going to be appreciated? That's laughable. You will not be appreciated. You hear these weird little stories about the stepkids who fall deeply in love with their stepdad. I imagine that happens. I don't imagine it happens all that much. If you look back even in old fairy tales, who were the evil people? It was the stepmom. It was the stepdad. It was the step person. They're the evil ones. That's the way it goes. They're the ones who are the butt end, the blame for everything. Don't do it, guys. So I got married. I was 32 years old enough to know better, had the mindset that I'd been raised with, which was ignorance, had the mindset of fantasy that I'd found my soulmate. And why did I find my soulmate? Because she was intelligent. She was going to have a successful career. I already had begun on my career, so, it was a good, steady career. A lot of money involved? No. It was a good job. A good job. And, college educated guy. I was not an idiot, but boy was I an idiot. So I got married, 32 years old. All that mindset was so ground in there was no undoing it, and it took a long time to undo it. Why did I think she was the one? We had great sex. If there is such a thing as being in love, I'm pretty sure I was in love. She may have even been in love. Did I understand the dynamic of hypergamy, resources, and all that? Never heard of that stuff. Never heard of it until recently, the last 5 years. Didn't know anything about that. So I married her. And of course, as the story goes, we got married. And I'm going to tell you right now, the sex didn't gradually die off over the course of the next 2 or 3 years. The sex stopped on the honeymoon. Did not even have sex on our honeymoon night. Probably the sex was like next to nothing. And I couldn't believe it. This is a woman who had promised me that we were going to have a very dynamic sexual relationship, which was important to me. I remember I was 32 then. Matter of fact, at 62, it's still important. Not as important. I don't want to pop anybody's bubble, but the drive ain't there, guys. Not like it was at 32, but it is still there. And I would not have a relationship now with anybody who wasn't even partially interested in a sexual life. We all knew. I mean, we had locker room talk. Some older men were a little bit more honest about it. They would let you know, look, guys, after marriage, after kids, after things go on, the sex does start to drop off somewhat. I had no idea how dramatically it would end. I don't think this is the case with anybody else, not to this extent. It became a 25-year-long sexless relationship. Now, why would anybody stay in that? That'll be revealed as time goes on. But that's what happened. Matter of fact, for the first few weeks of the marriage, I kept bringing up the topic of sex. She had just started her law practice, so she was tired and this and that, the whole I've got a headache. It was a real deal. And not only that, she started going out of her way. The minute she would get home from her job, you would have thought I was living with some trailer trash woman. The makeup was off, everything was thrown aside. I mean, there was not even any indication that she was trying to maintain any level of femininity. And yet still, I pursued this. And the few times we would have sex, she would go out of her way to make sure that first of all, it would not be pleasant. It would be more It'd be more akin to masturbating into another human being, which sounds pretty gross, but that's about the way it was. There was nothing. It was literally in her eyes, and I'm sure she would even state it this way at times. This is something we just got to get through. This went on throughout the marriage, but it got worse and less frequent, and quite frankly, I got disgusted with her and couldn't touch her anyway. And it was amazing. I'd never seen anything quite like this. I didn't even know it was physically, humanly possible that somebody could put on that much weight in such a short amount of time. She was always a curvy girl, but she was good looking. And I knew her back in her youth, talking teens, and she was hot. And she maintained a lot of that hotness. And for some reason, and I believe it's my theory, that she was trying to make herself as asexual and unappealing as she truly was inside. There was no need for her to even maintain the pretense of trying to keep a sexual relationship with me. So this was the beginning of a very long, very sad chapter in my life, of which I've recuperated, I'd say 85% from. Okay. All right, I'm going to try not to make any one video very long, because I know these are rambling, and I don't want to make them long, rambling videos. And plus, I'm hitting some traffic here. I'm getting right into San Bernardino, California, and the traffic's picking up. So I'll pick this up later. Anyway, take care, guys. Bye.